Greetings and welcome. My name is Michael. So, in the past few videos, we have been discussing the regime of accumulation. As you should know by now, the regime of accumulation is the specific way elites organize the extraction and accumulation of labor value from the working and middle classes. As we have seen, the regime of accumulation consists of extractive techniques, mechanisms of force, and ideological institutions. Extractive techniques and mechanisms of force are fairly easy to understand, but ideological institutions, which are institutions geared towards maintaining the system by controlling how people think about themselves, how they think about the world, and how they act in the world, are more of a challenge to wrap your head around. We saw in the last lesson, several institutions in our modern world function as ideological institutions. The two that we looked at last time were the institution of education and the institution of the family. In this lesson, I want to take a closer look at one of the more important ideological institutions created to control how we think and act in the world, and that is religion. So what is religion and how does it function as an ideological institution? Well, like other institutions in modern society, religion has an esoteric function and an exoteric function. The exoteric function of religion is to provide people with a community, with comfort in hard times, and with instruction on how to be a spiritual person, ostensibly. The esoteric function of religion is to help maintain the system by controlling how people think about themselves, how they think about the world, and how they act in the world. Religion performs this system maintenance function by propagating ideas, archetypes, and ideology designed to ensure that workers remain docile, compliant, and willing participants in their own exploitation. Sounds conspiratorial, I know, but it doesn't take much to show how religions are set up as ideological institutions. Take the Zoroastrian religion, for example. Zoroastrianism is a religion based on the mystical utterances of a prophet by the name of Zoroaster, who lived around 1000 BC in Persia, in and around where Iran is today. Back in the day, Zoroaster had a bunch of mystical experiences where he talked with God and some other spirits and came up with new information on what people needed to do if they wanted to live a spiritual life. His teachings were anti-elite and quite different than what had come before. His teachings were distributed word of mouth for over 1,000 years before they were finally written down in the Zoroastrian sacred texts known as the Gathas. However, even though Zoroastrianism is still an active religion, and even though there are sacred texts which purport to tell us what Zoroaster actually said, we really don't know for sure what he said. This is because his teachings come to us through an intermediary, specifically a 3rd century high priest by the name of Tansur. It was Tansur who took the word-of-mouth Zoroastrian teachings and finally wrote them down, but not in a good way. Tansur, you see, was not a neutral actor, and his concern was not providing an authentic reproduction of Zoroaster's teachings or an authentic presentation of Zoroastrian spiritual truths. Tansur worked for an autocrat by the name of Aradashir. Aradashir was not a religious or spiritual man. He wanted to use religion to consolidate his ruling power and dominate the region. To serve Aradashir, Tansur did not write down Zoroastrian teachings in good faith. Instead, Tansur selected a specific version of Zoroaster's teachings among several different lines of thought that existed at the time. As he wrote his chosen version down, he and Aradashir claimed ultimate authority over the teachings. They set up a new Zoroastrian church under the direct and authoritarian control of Aradashir's state. When they had established their canon, when they had taken control of the teachings, Aradashir sent his armies to sterilize the field with, as historian Mary Boyce says, excessive bloodshed. Aradashir and his high priest didn't rest until competing versions were suppressed. They engaged in a perpetual war against the people and said that only when the people accepted their particular version of Zoroaster's words would the bloodshed finally stop. As you can see, Tansur had a political agenda. He manipulated spiritual teachings and turned them into ideological weapons designed to facilitate his autocratic regime. Put in modern terms, Tanzer was the CEO of an ancient ideological institution. He worked to create ideology designed to facilitate Ardashir's accumulation of wealth and power. Because Tanzer and Ardashir went to so much trouble to erase competing versions, because Tanzer's goal was helping his regent rule the region, what he said was probably bent and twisted to fit their corrupted agenda. What we do know at this point is that Zoroastrian religion was not designed to reflect spiritual truths as taught by Zoroaster. It was designed to support the political and economic ambitions of the Persian autocrat. Notably, this is not the only example of the accumulating class co-opting human spirituality and using it to bolster and preserve power, wealth, and privilege. This occurred with Catholicism as well. As you may or may not know, the Christian church was created not by Jesus Christ, but by the Roman Emperor Constantine. Christ's original church wasn't the organized institution that we know today. The original church was a disorganized and grassroots affair where early Christians got together in each other's homes to talk about Jesus and his teachings. Notably, Jesus' teachings, like Zoroaster's, were very anti-elite, very opposed to the accumulating classes. Jesus went around throwing moneylenders out of the temples, calling the local members of the accumulating class poisonous hypocrites, and telling people it was easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than it was to get a rich person into heaven. Jesus and his followers even lobbied for radical forms of income redistribution. This was not the watered-down equality of opportunity or welfare as practiced by the church today. Early Christians were clearly calling for a redistribution of income and a fundamental equality between all people. As you might expect, this revolutionary program made Jesus quite popular amongst the masses, especially the poor. They loved him so much, in fact, that they wanted him to be king, which threatened and enraged the local accumulating classes so much that they conspired against him and ultimately had him assassinated. But killing Jesus didn't stop his teachings from spreading like wildfire throughout the region. As you read about in the Acts of the Apostles, particularly the early ones, not even brutal persecution at the hands of Roman military forces stopped the spread of his teachings. Which is why, I think, Roman Emperor Constantine finally gave up trying to suppress early Christianity and simply converted and took control of it. When Constantine took control, he did exactly what Tanzer did before him. With the help of his elite bishops, he erased competing teachings and elevated a single set of writings to canon. This is the New Testament that we are all familiar with today. It's important to understand here it was the elites of the time who chose what would go into the New Testament, not the people. It was their selection that became the standard Bible we all know today. And note, taking control of the teachings wasn't enough. If you read the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, you will know that even the stripped-down version created by Constantine and his bishops was problematic and potentially quite explosive. To deal with that, the Catholic Church hid the Bible away in monasteries, not letting the people read it for over 1,000 years. The Catholic bishops and priests were so focused on controlling access to the Bible that they even murdered people who tried to bring the Bible to a wider audience. You think about that. One fellow by the name of William Tyndale was burned at the stake in 1536 for successfully translating the Bible into English so that the people could actually read it for themselves. Members of the accumulating class resisted and only released the Bible to the public when the invention of the printing press made it impossible for them to maintain control of the information. It's odd when you think about it, right? If the church really represented Christ's teachings, why not make the only source of those teachings, the Bible, as open and accessible as possible? Why lock them away for 1,000 years? At this point, we can only speculate, but it seems reasonable to suggest that the elites at the time were afraid that if the people were given access to the Gospels and actually read them front to back, they would recognize the revolutionary Christ, rise up, and throw off their chains. You can see the pattern here. A mystical religious teacher comes along and preaches equality and emancipation to the people. The teachings are a threat to the accumulating class, and so the accumulating classes take control of the teachings, contain and modify them in a direction favorable to empire. In the case of Jesus Christ, they took the teachings of a grassroots revolutionary teacher teaching love, forgiveness, and equality and turned them into tools used to support colonization and empire. And how did they do that? What exactly did the accumulating class do to twist the teachings of Zoroaster, Jesus, and we can assume other spiritual teachers into a shape that conforms to the agenda of empire? Well, it's hard to say exactly at this point, since the historical research into the elite corruption of mystical teachings is quite lacking, but there are some tantalizing clues. For example, 2 passages from the Bible, one in 1 Timothy 2 and the other in 1 Corinthians 14, are both designed to create servile women. The first passage scapegoats women and reduces them to baby factories, while the other tells women bluntly to shut up and submit to their husbands. Now, the problem with these 2 passages, as Bible scholar Bart Ehrman points out, is that neither of them were written by the Apostle Paul, but by somebody who came along later. Somebody, I presume, working for the elite patriarchs, who probably just wanted women to shut up, submit to male authority, make babies, and not be a political bother. Now, despite these clues, it is hard to determine exactly how Tanzer or Constantine modified teachings because it happened so long ago. But we have a more recent example. The tarot deck that so many people use for psychic readings and spiritual training isn't a fountain of ancient wisdom. It was in fact created by elites with a political and economic agenda in mind. These elites took a plain pack of Italian cards with cute imagery and imposed their own spiritual meanings onto the deck. As I point out in a paper I wrote on this topic titled The Sociology of Tarot, these meanings had nothing to do with ancient wisdom and everything to do with creating modern systems of bureaucracy, hierarchy, subservience, and control. The case of the tarot here is quite important because unlike Christianity or Zoroastrianism, where elite manipulation of human spirituality is lost in the mists of time, the manipulation of the tarot by what I would call agents of consciousness is closer to us and therefore easier to examine. Now, we'll pick up a more detailed discussion of the tarot and the ideology behind that, Christianity and Zoroastrianism at a later date. If you want to be notified of that, like and subscribe. For now, just keep in mind that the tarot is not a fountain of ancient spiritual wisdom. It is, as tarot historians have said, a highly successful propaganda tool, one that has penetrated even into universities and in particular psychology, where legitimate psychologists blindly use this tarot as if it has deep spiritual cosmic meaning. Now, at this point, I think it is clear that in addition to its exoteric functions, religion also functions as an ideological institution which the accumulating class used to co-opt and corrupt spiritual narrative in order to contain and use that narrative to control how people think and act in the world. We see a little bit of this when we consider ancient religions like Zoroastrian and Christianity. However, it is more obvious in the case of modern elite manipulations like the tarot. Now, there is a lot more to say about ideological institutions, how they are created, how they operate, and what sorts of things they've done to the secular and spiritual narratives of this planet, but that's going to have to wait for another series. I think you've got enough at this point to chew on. So, to close up, let me just summarize what I've said so far. Money is abstracted labor time. Money is addictive, and the people who get addicted have set up a regime of accumulation, a system to enable increasingly efficient and exploitative extraction and accumulation of labor time. The system that they have set up consists of 3 things: extractive techniques, mechanisms of force, and ideological institutions. As we have seen, extractive techniques are the techniques used by the accumulating class to extract labor value from the working classes. mechanisms of force are things like the military, the police, the legal system, and forms of violence in the family used to create and maintain a compliant and subservient working class. Finally, ideological institutions are institutions created to reduce the need for violence by controlling how people think about themselves, how they think about the world, and the actions they are likely to take in the world. We'll be taking up a deeper analysis of ideological institutions in the months and years ahead, but if you're anxious to learn more, I recommend you pick up my book, The Rocket Scientist's Guide to Money and the Economy. It goes into much more depth about the system, how it started, how it operates, and what we can do about it. Till next time, my name is Michael. Welcome home.